A 7-foot wall of tactical gear and rage named Roman DeLuca exploded through the mahogany doors of Creed, the city's most exclusive restaurant, instantly turning a 500 per plate evening into an execution chamber. He swatted 3 bodyguards aside like champagne flutes, sending crystals shattering and patrons diving under tables while the nearest police precinct was still 12 minutes away. In the midst of the chaos, an unlikely figure stepped forward. Sarah. She was the clumsy rookie waitress who had been apologizing for dropping a fork just moments earlier. Yet, she didn't run. Instead, she launched herself horizontally through the air, hooked her leg around the giant's throat mid-charge, and did the unthinkable, stopping a 300-pound assassin in his tracks and freezing the dining room in stunned silence, proving that the most dangerous weapon in Creed wasn't the man in the pinstripe suit or the monster with the combat knife, but the woman who had been pouring the water. Alex Vincenzo didn't just sit at tables, he owned them. Tonight, Table 7 at Creed was his throne, a corner booth upholstered in burgundy leather that cost more than most people's cars. The crystal chandelier above cast him in a golden glow that seemed almost biblical, as if God himself had decided that Don of the Vincenzo family deserved better lighting than the rest of humanity. He was holding court with 4 men who had flown in from 3 different countries just to kiss his ring. Literally. 2 of them had already done it when they arrived, their lips briefly touching the gold band on his right hand while their eyes stayed locked on the floor. That's how you showed respect to a man who controlled half the East Coast's pharmaceutical imports and all of its dignity. The 61 Chateau Latour, Vincenzo said, without looking at the wine list, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that made waiters stand straighter. Tell Marcus I want the bottle from the private reserve, not the one he shows to the tourists with Daddy's credit card. The sommelier, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had served presidents, nodded so quickly his neck might have detached. Of course, Mr. Vincenzo, right away. Vincenzo leaned back, his charcoal suit fitted so perfectly it looked painted on. He was 63, but could pass for 50, his silver hair swept back, like a Roman senator's. His hands manicured and steady. Men feared those hands. Women had loved them once, before they learned what they were capable of. The conversation around the table was a symphony of deference. One man, a politician whose campaign Vincenzo had funded, laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't funny. Another, a judge, swirled his scotch and nodded at everything Vincenzo said like a dashboard bobblehead. They were powerful men reduced to sycophants, and Vincenzo fed on their submission like oxygen. That's when she appeared. Sarah Fernandez materialized at his elbow with a tray, balanced on trembling hands, her black uniform slightly too large, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it gave her a perpetual look of surprise. She was new. Everyone could tell by the way she moved, like a deer navigating a minefield of silverware and social hierarchy. Your appetizers, Mr. Vincenzo," she stammered, lowering the tray. Her hands shook so badly that the plates rattled against each other like nervous teeth. Vincenzo didn't even look at her. On the left, not the center. The center is for the wine. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." She shifted the plates, but her hands betrayed her again. A fork slipped from the tray and clattered onto the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot in a library. The entire table went silent. The politician stopped mid-laugh. The judge's hand froze halfway to his mouth. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Sarah's face flushed crimson. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vincenzo. I'll get another one right away." She bent down quickly, nearly knocking her head against the table's edge, her fingers fumbling to retrieve the fork like it was a live grenade. Vincenzo finally looked at her, his dark eyes scanning her with the interest one might give a smudged glass. "How long have you been working here?" 3 weeks, sir." Her voice cracked on weeks. 3 weeks, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the incompetence. And they put you on my table. The manager said, I don't care what Marcus said. Vincenzo's voice never rose. That was the terrifying part. Men who screamed were desperate. Vincenzo never had to scream. I care that when I come to Creed, I expect a certain level of professionalism. Do you understand what this restaurant is? Yes, sir. No, I don't think you do. He leaned forward slightly, and Sarah actually took a half step back, the fork now clutched in her white-knuckled fist. This restaurant is where deals are made that move millions of dollars, where careers are built and destroyed between the appetizer and the entree, and you're treating it like a Denny's on prom night. The men at the table shifted uncomfortably. The politician studied his water glass. The judge suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Sarah's eyes were glassy now, on the verge of tears. I understand, sir. I'm really sorry. I'll do better. Vincenzo held her gaze for 3 long seconds, then waved his hand dismissively, as if shooing away a mosquito. Bring the fork. Bring the wine. And for God's sake, stop shaking before you give me a reason to speak to Marcus about his hiring standards. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sarah backed away from the table like a servant leaving royalty, nearly tripping over her own feet before disappearing into the kitchen. The politician exhaled and forced a chuckle. These kids today, Alex, no spine. Vincenzo picked up his water glass, the ice cubes perfectly clear, like tiny diamonds. No, he said quietly, taking a sip. No spine at all. He had no idea he was wrong. He had no idea that in approximately 90 seconds, that spineless waitress would save his life. The mahogany doors didn't open. They exploded. The sound was like a car crash, compressed into a single moment, wood splintering, metal hinges screaming, and then the terrible silence that comes right before everyone starts screaming. The doors, each one weighing 200 pounds of imported Italian craftsmanship, flew inward and crashed against the marble columns with enough force to crack the stone. And through the wreckage walked Death. Roman DeLuca was 7 feet of enhanced muscle and pharmaceutical rage, his body so impossibly large that it seemed to violate the laws of physics. He wore black tactical gear that strained against shoulders built like foundation stones, and his face, God, his face, was spattered with blood that wasn't his own. His eyes were wrong, pupils dilated to pinpoints, the whites shot through with red veins like lightning strikes. Whatever cocktail of military-grade stimulants was pumping through his system had turned him into something that barely qualified as human anymore. He moved like an avalanche, with intent. The first security guard, Paolo, a former Marine who had survived Fallujah, stepped forward with his hand going to his concealed weapon. He was a professional, trained, experienced. It didn't matter. Roman's arm shot out and caught Paolo by the throat mid-draw. There was a wet, cracking sound, like someone snapping a bundle of twigs, and Paolo's body went limp before he could even scream. Roman threw him sideways into a support column with such force that the impact left a visible dent in the decorative plasterwork. Paolo crumpled to the floor and didn't move. The second guard, Marcus. Yes, Marcus the manager, who kept a Glock 19 in a shoulder holster under his suit jacket, managed to draw his weapon. He got off one shot. The bullet hit Roman square in the chest, right over the heart, and the giant didn't even flinch. The tactical vest absorbed it like a punch into a pillow. Roman crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and grabbed Marcus by the face, his entire hand covering the man's skull like a basketball. He lifted Marcus off his feet and drove him downward onto one of the dining tables. The table exploded under the impact, a $15,000 slab of reclaimed oak reduced to splinters and kindling. Marcus made a sound that was half scream, half wheeze, then went quiet. The third guard, Tony, the young one, the one with a pregnant wife at home, made the mistake of trying to tackle Roman from behind. It was brave and stupid in equal measure. Roman didn't even turn around. He just bent forward slightly, and Tony sailed over his back like a gymnast, vaulting a horse. Tony hit the bar, the collision producing another sickening crack that could have been ribs or the mahogany or both, and slid to the floor, leaving a smear of red on the brass rail. 3 guards. 7 seconds. 3 different kinds of broken. The dining room erupted into chaos. Women screamed. Men dove under tables. A waiter dropped an entire tray of creme brulee, the sound of shattering ceramic lost in the cacophony of pure terror. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying in rapid Italian. The pianist had abandoned his Steinway mid-measure, and the lingering notes hung in the air like a funeral dirge. Roman stood in the center of the carnage, chest heaving, his breath coming in deep animal grunts. Then his eyes, those terrible chemical eyes, locked onto table 7, locked onto Alex Vincenzo. Vincenzo felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, the absolute certainty of his own death. He didn't move, couldn't move. His body had made the calculation faster than his brain. There was no running from this, no negotiating. No amount of money or power that would stop what was about to happen. Roman De Luca had been sent here for one purpose, and he was a weapon that didn't miss. The men at Vincenzo's table had scattered like roaches when the lights come on. The politician was crawling toward the kitchen. The judge had actually wet himself, a dark stain spreading across his expensive trousers as he pressed himself against the wall. Only Vincenzo remained seated, his hands flat on the table, his face frozen in an expression of grim acceptance. This was how it ended. Not in a shootout, or a car bomb, or a federal prison. But here, in the restaurant he'd eaten at every Tuesday for 15 years, at the hands of a monster, someone had paid more than Vincenzo was willing to pay to stay alive. Roman started walking toward him. Each footstep a death knell on the marble floor. He drew a combat knife from his belt, 10 inches of black steel designed to punch through body armor. He didn't hurry. Why would he? There was nowhere for Vincenzo to go. Vincenzo closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter, married now, living in Milan where she didn't have to know what her father really was. He thought about his wife, dead 12 years, buried under a headstone that lied about what a good man he'd been. He thought about the 63 years he'd lived and the things he'd done to earn this ending. He heard Roman's breathing getting closer, heard the squeak of tactical boots on blood-slicked marble, heard his own heartbeat pounding its final measures. And then he heard something impossible, the sound of silverware clattering to the floor. The sound of footsteps, light, quick, purposeful, running toward the danger instead of away from it. The sound of Sarah's voice, no longer trembling, saying just one word with absolute authority. No! The tray hit the floor with a crash that somehow cut through the screaming. Sarah Fernandez, the nervous, trembling, fork-dropping rookie who had apologized her way through the last 3 weeks, was gone. The woman who stood in her place moved with the fluid certainty of someone who had done violence so many times it had become a second language. Roman turned toward the sound, his chemically enhanced brain processing this new variable. A waitress, a girl, no threat. He started to dismiss her, to return his attention to Vincenzo, but something in the way she moved made him pause. She wasn't running away. She was closing distance. Sarah's hands went to her hair, pulling out the pins that had kept it in that tight, severe bun. Her blonde hair fell loose around her shoulders, but the motion wasn't about vanity. It was about removing constraints. She rolled her shoulders once, twice, and the trembling timidity that had defined her every movement for 3 weeks evaporated like steam. "Step away from the table," she said, her voice level and cold. Roman laughed. It was a horrible sound, wet and chemical and wrong, like a garbage disposal trying to process something it wasn't designed for. He shifted his bulk to face her fully, the combat knife still gripped in his massive hand. "Little girl should run," he said, his words slurred by whatever cocktail was eating his brain. "Little girl should hide." "Last chance," Sarah said. She was already moving, her feet sliding into a stance that no waitress should know, weight distributed, knees bent, hands open and ready. Roman charged. For a man his size, he moved with terrifying speed, closing the 15 feet between them in less than 2 seconds. The knife came up in a practiced arc designed to open her from hip to shoulder. It was a killing blow, and he'd done it before, muscle memory written in other people's blood. Sarah didn't retreat. She exploded forward. At the last possible moment, she dropped into a slide, her body going horizontal as she passed beneath his reaching arm. Her leg shot out and hooked behind his knee, the only joint on his massive frame that had to obey physics. Roman's forward momentum betrayed him. His leg buckled, and for the first time since he'd crashed through those doors, the giant stumbled. But Sarah wasn't done. As Roman fought for balance, she used his own body as a springboard, one foot planting on his bent knee, the other on his hip, and then she was airborne, twisting in mid-flight like a trapeze artist who'd learned to fly in darker, bloodier circuses. Time seemed to fracture. The remaining patrons who hadn't fled watched in paralyzed disbelief. Vincenzo, his eyes now open, stared with the expression of a man watching his own execution get interrupted by something he couldn't process. Sarah's leg whipped around Roman's neck like a python, her body perpendicular to his, suspended in the air for one crystalline moment. A water glass fell from a nearby table in slow motion. A fork clattered against a plate. Someone's champagne flute toppled and rolled, then gravity reasserted itself. Sarah used every ounce of her momentum and torqued her body with brutal efficiency. Roman's head snapped sideways with enough force to make his neck vertebrae pop like bubble wrap. His massive frame, already off balance, went with it. 7 feet and 300 pounds of enhanced muscle crashed to the marble floor with the sound of a grand piano being dropped from a second-story window. The entire restaurant shook. Sarah landed in a crouch, 5 feet away, perfectly balanced, her breathing controlled and steady. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, and there was a thin line of blood on her forearm, where Roman's knife had come closer than she'd wanted. But she was up and ready before Roman even stopped sliding across the blood-slicked floor. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Roman lay sprawled on his back, staring at the chandelier with eyes that couldn't quite focus. His hand still gripped the knife, but weakly now, his enhanced nervous system trying to reconnect signals that Sarah had just scrambled. He wasn't unconscious. The drugs in his system wouldn't allow that. But he was rebooting, his brain trying to understand how a 120-pound waitress had just put him on the ground. Sarah straightened slowly, her eyes never leaving him. The transformation was complete. The woman standing in the ruins of Creed's dining room bore no resemblance to the girl who had dropped a fork 10 minutes ago. Her posture was different. Her expression was different. The entire frequency she operated on had shifted to something primal and precise. She looked at Vincenzo, who was still frozen at his table, his mouth actually hanging open. "Get behind the bar," she said. Not a request, an order. Now. Vincenzo didn't move, couldn't move. His entire understanding of reality had just been demolished as thoroughly as his security team. "Mr. Vincenzo," Sarah said, her tone sharpening, "I can't protect you and fight him at the same time, so you have exactly 3 seconds to decide if you want to live through the next 5 minutes. That broke the spell. Vincenzo scrambled out of the booth with none of his earlier dignity, actually tripping over his own feet in his haste to put the marble bar between himself and Roman DeLuca. On the floor, Roman's fingers began to flex. His breathing deepened. The drugs were doing their job, flooding his system with enough adrenaline and synthetic rage to override the scrambled signals. Sarah saw it and understood. She'd bought 30 seconds, maybe less. The giant was getting back up. Sarah didn't wait for Vincenzo to process what was happening. She grabbed him by his expensive suit collar and physically hauled him behind the bar with a strength that made it clear the trembling waitress act had been a lie from the beginning. Vincenzo stumbled, his Italian leather shoes slipping on spilled champagne, and crashed into the back cabinet hard enough to rattle the top-shelf scotch. "Stay down!" Sarah snapped, already moving. She grabbed the marble serving counter, a solid piece that had to weigh 200 pounds, and with a grunt of effort, tipped it onto its side. It hit the floor with a thunderous crack, creating a barricade between them and the dining room. Bottles shattered, glasses exploded. The smell of a dozen different liquors mixed with blood and fear. Vincenzo pressed himself against the cabinet, his brain still trying to catch up with his body. He'd seen people killed. He'd ordered people killed. But he'd never seen someone move the way Sarah had moved, like violence was a dance she'd been choreographing her entire life. "Who the hell are you?" His voice came out hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. Sarah ignored him. She was scanning the bar's contents with the tactical assessment of someone inventorying weapons, not refreshments. Her fingers closed around a wine bottle, the 61 Chateau Latour that Vincenzo had ordered, ironically, and she tested its weight with a practiced grip. Not ideal, but it would crack a skull if applied correctly. If you are enjoying this story, I need you to subscribe for more stories like this and like this video to support me. From beyond the barricade came the sound they'd both been dreading. Roman getting to his feet. The scrape of tactical boots on marble. The wet, ragged breathing of a man whose body was eating itself from the inside out to stay functional. A low growl that sounded more animal than human. "I asked you a question," Vincenzo hissed, trying to reclaim some fragment of control. "You work for the Calabrese family. The Russians. Who sent you?" Sarah finally looked at him, and Vincenzo actually flinched from what he saw in her eyes. They were cold and calculating, the eyes of someone doing complex mathematics, where the variables were all measured in blood and bullets. "Nobody sent me," she said flatly. "I've been here 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on your organization for a federal task force that doesn't officially exist. I was supposed to be invisible for another month before we moved on you." She grabbed a second bottle, vodka this time, higher proof. "But your friend out there just ruined 6 months of operational planning, so now we're both having a bad night." Vincenzo's face went through several colors. "You're a Fed?" "Was. The agency got dismantled. Political fallout. I'm technically unemployed." Sarah glanced over the edge of the barricade. Roman was standing now, rolling his massive shoulders, his neck still at a slight angle from where she'd torqued it. He was looking directly at their position, and even from this distance, she could see the way his pupils had contracted to pinpoints. "But I spent 12 years learning how to kill people who are very difficult to kill, so the skill set transfers." A tremendous crash made them both duck. Roman had picked up one of the intact dining tables, solid oak, probably 300 pounds, and hurled it across the room like a frisbee. It smashed into the wall above the bar, raining splinters and chunks of wood down on their position. "He's trying to flush us out," Sarah said, more to herself than to Vincenzo. She was thinking, processing, running scenarios. "He's not tactical, just brute force and chemistry. That's good. Means he's predictable." "Predictable?" Vincenzo's voice cracked on the word. "That thing just threw a table." "Yeah, and he threw it at where we are, not where we're going to be." Sarah started pulling down bottles, lining them up. "The drugs make him strong and aggressive, but they also make him stupid. He's already forgotten the first rule of combat. Which is, don't let your enemy control the terrain." Sarah grabbed a bar towel and started tearing it into strips. "We can't stay here. He'll just keep throwing furniture until something crushes us or he runs out of things to throw. We need to move." Another crash. This time, a chair, spinning through the air like a helicopter blade, embedding itself in the ceiling above them. Vincenzo grabbed her arm, and Sarah's hand was on his wrist before he could blink, her grip like a mechanical vice. He let go immediately, raising both hands. "Listen to me," he said quickly. "I have people. I make one call, and I can have 50 soldiers here in 20 minutes. We just need to survive for 20 minutes?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Look at him." Vincenzo risked a glance over the barricade. Roman was systematically destroying the dining room, flipping tables, ripping chairs apart with his bare hands, creating a wasteland of splintered wood and shattered glass. His movements were becoming more erratic, more violent. Foam was starting to form at the corners of his mouth. "He's crashing," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever they gave him, his body is starting to reject it. In 20 minutes, he'll either be dead or he'll have destroyed everything in this building, including us. We've got maybe 5 minutes before the drugs push him into a full berserker state, and then there's no predicting what he'll do. So what's your plan?" Sarah looked at him with an expression that somehow contained both absolute confidence and complete resignation to the insanity of their situation. "We run," she said, "through the kitchen, out the back. Once we're in the service corridors, his size works against him. Tight spaces, narrow doors, I can use that." "And if we don't make it to the kitchen?" Sarah picked up the bottle of Chateau Latour, feeling its weight one more time. "Then you're about to find out why the government spent $2 million training me to kill people in close quarters with improvised weapons." Roman roared, an inhuman sound of pure rage, and something much larger hit the wall. The entire building shook. "Time's up," Sarah said. "When I move, you move. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Just run." Vincenzo nodded, his jaw set. For a man who'd ordered countless deaths, he'd never actually had to run for his life before. It was a novel experience, and possibly his last. Sarah was about to give the signal to run when she saw them. Red dots, dozens of them, dancing across the walls like deadly fireflies, sweeping through the shattered dining room in coordinated patterns that spoke of professional training and military discipline. Laser sights. "Down!" She shoved Vincenzo flat against the floor as a line of red crawled across the bar's back panel, inches from where his head had been. Her mind was already racing through the implications, and none of them were good. Roman hadn't come alone. She risked another glance over the barricade, using a shard of broken mirror to angle her view without exposing herself. What she saw made her stomach drop. Through the destroyed main entrance, she could count at least 8 figures in tactical gear, fanned out in a professional entry formation. They wore black body armor and helmets with full face shields, and each one carried a suppressed submachine gun that probably cost more than most cars. "Jesus Christ," Vincenzo whispered, seeing the same thing. "How many people want me dead tonight?" Sarah didn't answer. She was counting exits, calculating angles, running probability scenarios that all ended the same way. Badly. The main entrance was covered by the tactical team. The emergency exits along the side walls. She could see more laser sights sweeping those areas, meaning they had the perimeter locked down. The windows were bulletproof glass, and even if they weren't, they were on the 3rd floor. That left the kitchen. One way in, one way out. And if Roman's team had half a brain between them, they'd already have someone covering it. They were boxed in. Roman seemed to sense his support arriving. He stopped his rampage and turned toward the entrance, his massive chest heaving. One of the tactical operators approached him, carefully, like someone approaching a rabid dog, and handed him something. Sarah's enhanced vision caught the glint of metal, a radio earpiece. Roman shoved it in his ear, and even from across the room, Sarah could see his expression change. the berserker rage focused into something more dangerous. Directed purpose. He nodded once, twice, and pointed directly at the bar where she and Vincenzo were hiding. "They're coordinating," Sarah said, mostly to herself. She was already pulling back, reassessing everything. This isn't just an assassination, it's a professional extraction team. Extraction? Vincenzo's face had gone pale. "They want to take me alive. Not you." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Me." The pieces were clicking together now, forming a picture she really didn't like. Roman wasn't here to kill Vincenzo. He was bait. The real target had always been Sarah, or whoever was deep cover in this restaurant. Someone had burned her. Someone knew exactly who she was and had orchestrated this entire clusterfuck to draw her out. And she'd walked right into it. A voice echoed through the dining room, amplified by a speaker system that made it sound like God announcing the apocalypse. It was male, calm, with a slight European accent she couldn't quite place. Sarah Fernandez, former Special Activities operative. Codename Sparrow. The voice paused, letting that sink in. "We know who you are. We know what you can do. And we know you're behind that bar with Mr. Vincenzo." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Sparrow. She hadn't heard that name in 2 years, not since the agency had been dissolved, and she'd been cut loose with a fake identity and a warning to disappear. Someone had kept very good records. "We're not here for Vincenzo," the voice continued, almost conversational. "Frankly, we don't care if he lives or dies. We're here for you. Come out peacefully, and we'll let everyone else in this building walk away. Keep hiding, and we start executing the civilians we have zip-tied in the coat room. Your choice. You have 60 seconds. Vincenzo stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and growing fury. "This is about you. I'm about to die because of you." "Shut up," Sarah hissed. Her mind was working through options at computer speed. They had hostages. That changed everything. She could fight her way out. Maybe. But not while protecting Vincenzo, and not while innocent people were being held at gunpoint. More red dots swept across their position. She counted the patterns, the intervals. 8 operators, probably ex-military, definitely well-funded. Roman as their battering ram. Unknown number covering the exterior exits. Professional comms and coordination. This wasn't a hit, it was a net. And she was the fish. 45 seconds, the voice announced cheerfully. Sarah looked at the kitchen door, 20 feet away across open floor that was now covered by at least 4 different firing angles. Even if she could cross that distance, and that was a big if, Roman was positioned directly between them and freedom, and he'd recovered enough that his hands had stopped shaking. She looked at Vincenzo, who was pressed against the cabinet, his expensive suit soaked with spilled alcohol, and his face showing something she'd never seen there before. Genuine terror. She looked at the bottles lined up beside her, the improvised weapons that wouldn't do shit against body armor and automatic weapons. 30 seconds. A laser sight found its way over the barricade, painting a red dot on the wall above Vincenzo's head. Then another. Then 3 more. They were triangulating, showing her exactly how many angles of fire they had established. It was a professional's way of saying, "We own this room." 20 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done in 5 years of covert operations. She prayed. Not to God. She'd stopped believing in that during her 3rd Black Op, but to luck, to chaos, to whatever force in the universe occasionally let the underdog win. 10 seconds. She opened her eyes and looked at Vincenzo, really looked at him. A murderer, a drug lord, a man responsible for countless deaths. She should let them have him. Should use him as a distraction and rabbit for the kitchen while they were busy shooting him. But that's not what sparrows did. Sparrows saved people, even when those people didn't deserve it. Even when it was going to get her killed. "Time's up," the voice said. And then the lights went out. The lights didn't go out by accident. Sarah had seen the emergency power panel behind the bar during her 3 weeks of careful observation, mapping every inch of Creed's layout like her life might depend on it. Turns out it did. The moment darkness swallowed the dining room, she was already moving, her hand finding Vincenzo's collar in the blackness with the certainty of muscle memory. "Go!" she hissed, hauling him forward. The tactical team's night vision would kick in within seconds, but seconds were all she needed. She knew this room in the dark, had practiced walking it blindfolded during her overnight cleaning shifts when she was supposed to be mopping floors. She knew the overturned chair at 10 o'clock, the shattered table at 2, the exact path through the debris field that wouldn't slow them down. Vincenzo stumbled beside her, his expensive shoes sliding on blood and champagne, but Sarah's grip kept him upright and moving. Behind them, she heard shouting, professional, clipped commands in tactical shorthand, and the whir of night vision equipment powering up. Then Roman roared, and the sound was so close it raised every hair on Sarah's neck. They hit the kitchen doors at a full sprint. Sarah led with her shoulder, and the double doors exploded inward, carrying them from darkness into a landscape of gleaming steel and industrial fire. The kitchen was still fully lit, running on a separate circuit, and the sudden brightness was blinding after the darkness of the dining room. The heat hit them like a physical wall. Every burner was still on, flames licking up from gas ranges in blue and orange columns. A pot of something had boiled over, sending steam billowing toward the ventilation hoods. The industrial ovens radiated waves of heat that made the air shimmer. Someone had abandoned a sauté pan on high flame, and whatever had been in it was now charcoal, sending up black smoke that the overwhelmed ventilation system couldn't quite clear. The chefs were long gone. Sarah could see evidence of their panicked flight, a knife dropped mid-chop, vegetables scattered across a cutting board, a door to the walk-in freezer standing open with vapor spilling out like ground fog. They'd run the moment the shooting started, which was the smartest thing anyone had done all night. "Keep moving," Sarah commanded, dragging Vincenzo deeper into the kitchen. Her eyes were already cataloguing the environment, transforming a commercial kitchen into a battlefield. The steel prep tables could provide cover. The hanging pots and pans could be weapons or distractions. The industrial stoves were hazards that cut both ways. They made it to the far end of the kitchen, near the pastry station, before the doors behind them crashed open. Roman filled the doorway like a nightmare given physical form, his silhouette backlit by the darkness of the dining room. He had to duck to fit through the frame, his shoulders so broad they nearly touched both sides. The kitchen's fluorescent lights revealed the full extent of the damage Sarah had done. His neck was swelling on one side, and there was a gloss of blood at the corner of his mouth where he'd bitten through his own tongue. But he was still standing, still moving. Still fueled by whatever chemical cocktail had turned him into something that refused to acknowledge its own mortality. "Behind the line," Sarah said to Vincenzo, pointing to the row of industrial stoves that separated the prep area from the cooking stations. It wasn't much cover, but it was something. Vincenzo didn't argue. For a man who'd spent his life giving orders, he was learning quickly how to take them. Sarah grabbed a chef's knife from the magnetic strip on the wall, 10 inches of German steel, perfectly balanced, sharp enough to split atoms. It felt good in her hand. Familiar. She'd trained with knives before she'd learned to use guns, back when the agency still believed in quiet solutions to loud problems. Roman took a step into the kitchen, and another, his boots leaving bloody prints on the white tile floor. He'd picked up a meat cleaver somewhere, a massive thing designed for breaking down whole animal carcasses, and it looked almost proportional in his enormous hand. "Little bird," he growled, his voice slurred and wet. "Nowhere to fly now," Sarah didn't respond, didn't waste breath on witty comebacks or tactical assessments. She just moved, circling to put the center prep table between them, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. The kitchen's heat wrapped around her like a second skin, and she could feel sweat already starting to bead on her forehead. The tactical team would be coming through those doors any second. She could hear them organizing in the dining room, their professional calm a stark contrast to Roman's chemically induced rage. But they were being cautious now, probably recalibrating after she'd killed the lights. That bought her maybe 30 seconds before this became a shooting gallery. 30 seconds to put down a 7-foot monster with a cleaver. She'd worked with worse odds. Roman lunged, faster than something his size should move, bringing the cleaver down in an overhead chop that would have split her skull like a melon. Sarah twisted sideways, feeling the displaced air as the blade whistled past her ear and embedded itself in the prep table with a sound like a gunshot. The table was industrial steel. The cleaver sank 3 inches deep. Roman tried to pull it free, and in that half-second of distraction, Sarah struck. Her knife flashed out, targeting the exposed tendon above his boot, looking for the spot where Achilles had learned his lesson the hard way. The blade bit deep, and for the first time, Roman actually screamed. Blood sprayed across the white tile, arterial red against sterile white, and Roman's leg buckled, but he didn't go down. The drugs wouldn't let him. Instead, he pivoted on his good leg and backhanded Sarah with enough force to send her flying into a rack of hanging pots. She hit hard, and the world became a cacophony of clanging metal and ringing bells that weren't really there. Her vision doubled, then tripled, and she tasted copper in her mouth. Through the haze, she saw Roman limping toward her, leaving a trail of blood, his face twisted into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so terrible. Behind him, tactical lights swept through the kitchen doors. Time was up. The tactical team stopped at the kitchen entrance. Sarah saw it through the spinning chaos of her concussion, the lead operator raising a closed fist, the universal signal for halt. They had Roman between them and their target, and even with night vision and body armor, nobody wanted to accidentally shoot their own battering ram. The hesitation bought her maybe 10 seconds. She used them to not die. Rolling sideways through the hanging pots, Sarah grabbed the edge of the industrial sink and pulled herself up. Her head was screaming, her ribs felt cracked where she'd hit the rack, and she could taste blood. But she was vertical, and vertical meant functional. Roman was limping toward her, his ruined Achilles tendon leaving a Rorschach pattern of blood across the tile. The wound should have dropped him, would have dropped any normal human. But whatever cocktail was eating through his system had shut off his pain receptors and replaced them with pure, chemical hatred. Then something unexpected happened. Vincenzo stepped out from behind the stove line. Not to fight. The man wasn't that stupid. But he was holding something. One of the propane torches the pastry chefs used for creme brulee. He'd ignited it, and the blue flame hissed like an angry snake. "Hey!" Vincenzo shouted, his voice cracking but determined. "Hey, you pharmaceutical nightmare!" Roman paused, his drug-addled brain processing this new variable. He turned slightly, dividing his attention between Sarah and Vincenzo. Sarah seized the moment. She grabbed the industrial spray nozzle from the sink behind her and aimed it directly at the gas burners, still flaming on the stove line. The high-pressure water hit the flames, creating an instant explosion of steam that filled the kitchen with scalding white fog. The tactical team's night vision turned the steam into an impenetrable wall. She heard cursing, heard someone ordering them to hold position until visibility improved. In the sudden cover of billowing steam, Sarah moved. She grabbed Vincenzo by the arm and pulled him into the walk-in freezer, slamming the heavy door behind them. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in an instant, and suddenly they could breathe again, their gasps turning to visible clouds in the refrigerated air. Vincenzo was shaking, the propane torch still clutched in his hand. Sarah took it from him gently and turned it off, plunging them into the dim emergency lighting of the freezer. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said, leaning against a shelf of hanging meat. "I'm still deciding which," Vincenzo admitted. He slid down to sit on the floor, his expensive suit now ruined beyond any tailor's ability to salvage. For a moment, they just sat there in the cold, listening to their own breathing and the muffled sounds of the tactical team reorganizing outside. Then Vincenzo spoke, his voice low and urgent. "How much?" Sarah looked at him. "What? How much do they want for you? There's always a number." He was reaching for his inside pocket, pulling out a phone with a cracked screen. "I can wire money anywhere in the world. Cayman accounts, Swiss banks, cryptocurrency. Name the figure and I'll double it, triple it. Whatever they're paying, I'll pay more." Sarah almost laughed, but it hurt too much. "That's not how this works. Everything works that way." Vincenzo's eyes were desperate now, the veneer of the untouchable Don completely stripped away. "Everyone has a price. Those men out there? Someone's paying them. Whoever sent them. Someone paid them first. It's all just economics. I'm offering to make you rich enough that you never have to do this again." "I don't do this for money," Sarah said quietly. "Then why?" Vincenzo gestured at the freezer door, at the chaos beyond it. "You could have run the moment the lights went out. Could have left me there and disappeared. They don't want me. You said it yourself. So why are you still here?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her breath clouding in the frigid air. Outside, she could hear Roman's heavy footsteps circling, hear the tactical team's radio chatter as they coordinated their next move. They had maybe 2 minutes before someone figured out where they'd gone. "6 years ago," she finally said. "I was on an operation in Bogota. Bad intel. Worse planning. My team was compromised, and we were trying to extract an informant. A kid, really. Maybe 19. He'd helped us map a cartel's distribution network, and they'd found out." She touched the scar on her forearm, hidden under her sleeve. "We were 50 feet from the extraction point when they hit us. I had to choose. Save my team or save the kid." "Which did you choose?" "I tried to save both." Sarah's voice was flat, emotionless, the way people talk about trauma when they've had to relive it too many times. "Lost 3 operators. The kid died anyway, bled out in my arms while I was trying to carry him and return fire at the same time." Vincenzo was quiet, watching her face in the dim light. "After that," Sarah continued, "the agency wanted to know why I'd jeopardized the team for one asset. Why I didn't just cut losses and extract. You know what I told them? What? That the day I start measuring human lives by operational value is the day I stop being human." She looked at Vincenzo directly. "You're a murderer, a drug lord. You've destroyed more lives than I could save in 10 lifetimes. And if we both survive this, I'll still testify against you at your trial." "Then why?" "Because those people in the coat room didn't choose to be here tonight. Because letting you die to save myself makes me exactly like the people who trained me to kill without conscience." Sarah pushed herself up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "I don't save you because you're worth saving. I save you because losing that part of myself isn't worth any amount of survival." Vincenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You know what the funny thing is? I've spent 30 years surrounding myself with people who die for me. And the one person who actually might? She's the one trying to put me in prison." "Life's full of little ironies," Sarah said. She moved to the freezer door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. "They're getting organized out there. We've got maybe 90 seconds before they breach this door." "So what's the plan?" Sarah pulled the chef's knife from where she'd tucked it in her belt. The blade was still stained with Roman's blood. "We stop running," she said. and we end this. The freezer door exploded inward with a force that sent frozen vapor billowing into the kitchen like a special effect from hell. Roman had stopped trying to be subtle. He'd simply grabbed the industrial handle and ripped the entire locking mechanism out of the doorframe, twisted metal screaming in protest. Sarah had anticipated this. She and Vincenzo were already moving, having positioned themselves on either side of the door. As Roman's massive frame filled the opening, Sarah struck first, not at him, but at the environment. She grabbed the CO2 fire extinguisher, mounted on the wall, and discharged it directly into his face at point-blank range. The blast of compressed gas and chemical powder wasn't meant to hurt him. It was meant to blind him. Roman stumbled backward, clawing at his eyes, and Sarah used those precious seconds to put distance between them. She pulled Vincenzo toward the center of the kitchen, to the main cooking line where fire still danced on burners and steam still rose from forgotten pots. The tactical team was fanning out behind Roman, but they couldn't get a clean shot, not with their giant asset thrashing around like a tornado. Sarah had maybe 30 seconds before they repositioned and turned this into a firing squad. Roman cleared his vision faster than she'd hoped, shaking his head like a dog shedding water. When he focused on her again, there was something new in his expression. Not just rage, but respect. She'd hurt him. Multiple times. Nothing in his chemical-soaked brain had prepared him for prey that fought back this effectively. He charged, and the kitchen became a battlefield measured in inches and seconds. Sarah grabbed a pot of boiling stock from the stove and hurled the contents at him. The scalding liquid hit his chest and face, and this time, finally, he actually reacted to pain. The scream was animal, primal, the sound of nerves that even military-grade stimulants couldn't completely silence. But he kept coming. Sarah dove under the prep table as Roman brought his fist down where she'd been standing. The stainless steel surface cratered under the impact, the metal actually folding inward. If that had connected with her skull, there wouldn't have been enough left to identify. She rolled, came up on the other side, grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the hanging rack. 12 pounds of solid metal, hot from sitting near the stove. She swung it in a tight arc that would have made a tennis pro proud, connecting with Roman's already injured knee. The crack was audible even over the chaos. Roman's leg buckled, and for the first time, he actually went down to one knee. Sarah didn't hesitate. She vaulted onto the prep table, using it as a springboard, and launched herself at the hanging pot rack above Roman's head. Her hands found the steel bar, and she used her momentum to swing her entire body forward, both feet connecting with Roman's face in a devastating double kick. It was like kicking a concrete wall. Pain shot through her ankles and up her legs, but Roman's head snapped back, blood spraying from his nose. He toppled backward, crashing into the pastry station and destroying 3 days' worth of dessert preparation. Sarah landed in a crouch, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Every part of her body was screaming. The concussion was making the room spin. Her ribs were definitely cracked. But Roman was down, and that was all that mattered. Except he was getting back up. "You have got to be kidding me," Sarah muttered. The tactical team was moving now, trying to get angles on her. She saw laser sights sweeping across the kitchen, and she knew her luck was running out. That's when Vincenzo did something surprising for the second time that night. He grabbed the propane torch he'd been carrying earlier, reignited it, and touched the flame to the industrial deep fryer that someone had left on. The oil inside was well past its smoking point, and the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The fryer erupted in a column of flame that licked the ceiling, setting off the sprinkler system. Water began raining down, mixing with the grease fire to create even more chaos. The tactical team scattered, shouting warnings about the fire spreading. In the confusion, Sarah saw her opening. Roman was on his feet again, but he was struggling now. Blood loss, chemical crash, and accumulated damage were finally overwhelming even his enhanced physiology. His movements were slower, less coordinated. His eyes couldn't quite focus. Sarah grabbed the last weapon she needed, a boning knife, thin and flexible, designed for precision cuts. She moved toward Roman, and this time he tried to grab her. His massive hand reached out, fast despite everything, and caught her by the shoulder. His grip was like a vice. Sarah felt something in her shoulder separate, felt the hot spike of pain that meant ligament damage. But she was already moving, already committed to the final strike. She drove the boning knife into the side of Roman's neck, just above the collarbone, angling it downward. Not to kill. She needed him alive for the testimony he could provide, but to hit the nerve cluster that would shut down his motor functions. The technique was called a neural strike, and she'd only successfully executed it twice in her career. It required perfect precision, perfect angle, perfect depth. She nailed it. Roman's entire body went rigid. His hand released her shoulder as every muscle locked simultaneously. His eyes went wide with something that might have been fear, might have been surprise, might have been respect. Then he toppled forward like a felled tree. Sarah stepped aside, and 300 pounds of enhanced muscle hit the tile floor with a wet, final thud. This time he didn't get back up. His chest was still rising and falling. She could see that. But he was done. The combination of blood loss, neural disruption, and chemical crash had finally achieved what violence alone couldn't. The giant had fallen. Sarah turned to face the tactical team, the boning knife still in her hand, water from the sprinklers streaming down her face like tears. She was done running, done hiding. Last chance, she said, her voice carrying over the sound of falling water and crackling fire. Walk away, or I put every single one of you down like I put him down. The lead operator raised his weapon, and Sarah prepared for what came next. Then the siren started. Not one or two. Dozens. The cavalry had finally arrived, drawn by the fire alarms and the reports of shots fired. The operator hesitated, listening to something in his earpiece, then made a gesture to his team. They withdrew. Just like that, melting back into the darkness of the dining room. Professional ghosts disappearing before the lights of legitimacy arrived. Sarah stood there in the ruined kitchen, water streaming down, holding a knife, standing over the body of a giant, and realized she'd actually survived. She'd actually won. The sirens were getting louder, multiplying like electronic insects, converging on Creed from every direction. Sarah could hear the screech of tires, the slam of car doors, the sharp commands of officers establishing a perimeter. In approximately 90 seconds, this kitchen would be full of police, paramedics, and questions she couldn't answer without destroying what was left of her cover. She looked down at Roman's massive form sprawled across the tile, water from the sprinklers pooling around him like a moat. His chest was still rising and falling. Shallow, irregular breaths that meant his body was fighting to stay functional, despite everything she'd done to it. He'd live, probably, long enough to be arrested, processed, and turned into leverage against whoever had sent him. That would have to be enough. Vincenzo was leaning against the prep table, his suit jacket torn, his face streaked with soot and blood that might or might not be his own. He was staring at Roman with the expression of a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. For 30 years, he'd believed that power was money, influence, and the ability to make people disappear. Tonight had taught him that power could also be a 120-pound woman with a boning knife and the training to know exactly where to put it. We need to get our stories straight, Vincenzo said, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. The police will want to know. You don't know me, Sarah interrupted, already moving toward the back of the kitchen. You've never seen me before tonight. I was just a waitress who got lucky. Lucky? Vincenzo gestured at the devastation around them, the broken equipment, the fire damage, the unconscious giant. You called this lucky, compared to the alternative? Sarah was at the emergency exit now, the one that led to the service corridor and the freight elevator. She could hear voices in the dining room, officers beginning their sweep. Yes, I call this very lucky. She reached up and untied her apron, the black fabric now stained with blood, grease, and enough evidence to put her at the scene for years of forensic analysis. She folded it carefully, almost ritualistically, and set it on the stainless steel counter near the door. Wait, Vincenzo said, taking a step toward her. I need to know. You need to forget, Sarah cut him off. Her hand was on the door handle now, and she could feel the clock running out. 30 seconds, maybe less. Tonight, Roman DeLuca attacked your restaurant. Your security team fought bravely. Some waitress, you never caught her name, helped during the chaos, then disappeared in the confusion. That's the only story that keeps both of us breathing. Vincenzo's jaw worked, a dozen questions trying to force their way out. The federal case against me. You said you were gathering evidence. I was. Sarah met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not quite understanding, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of mutual respect between two people who'd survived impossible odds together. But the agency that was building it doesn't exist anymore. And the woman who was collecting that evidence? She died tonight in the chaos. You're going to get away with everything you've done, Mr. Vincenzo. Consider it a gift. A gift? His voice rose slightly, colored with something that might have been anger or might have been desperation. You spent 6 months trying to destroy me. I spent 6 months documenting your crimes so justice could be served through proper channels. Sarah's hand tightened on the door handle. 15 seconds. But tonight taught me something. The world isn't neat. Justice isn't clean. And sometimes the right choice is letting the guilty man live so that innocents don't die in the crossfire. She paused. The people in that coat room get to go home to their families because I made that call. That's worth more than putting you in prison. The voices in the dining room were getting closer. She could hear an officer directing others toward the kitchen, hear the crackle of police radios coordinating their sweep. I never even knew your real name, Vincenzo said quietly. Sarah allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Yes, you did. It was on my name tag. Sarah. That part was true. She pushed the door open, and cool air from the service corridor rushed in to mix with the heat and smoke of the kitchen. Live better, Mr. Vincenzo, or at least try not to die worse. Will I see you again? God, I hope not. She stepped through the door and let it swing shut behind her. The last thing Vincenzo saw was her silhouette disappearing into the darkness of the corridor, moving with that same purposeful grace that had saved his life. And then she was gone. He stood there for a moment, alone in the ruined kitchen with an unconscious giant and the sound of sirens screaming their arrival. Then he looked down at the apron she'd left behind, folded neatly on the counter like a flag at a military funeral. The name tag was still pinned to it. Sarah F. Employee, NYSHA 2847, 3 weeks of service at Creed. The kitchen door burst open, and police flooded in with weapons drawn, shouting commands, demanding he get on the ground. Vincenzo complied without resistance, his hands raised, his movements slow and deliberate. As they cuffed him, just procedure, they assured him. Just until they sorted everything out, his eyes kept drifting back to that apron. 2 hours later, after the statements had been taken, and the crime scene had been documented, and Roman DeLuca had been loaded into an ambulance under armed guard, Vincenzo was finally allowed to leave. The detective in charge, a tired woman with sharp eyes, had asked him about the mysterious waitress who'd been mentioned by several witnesses. I don't know, Vincenzo had said, and it was almost the truth. Everything happened so fast. I never got a good look at her face." The detective had nodded, making notes, clearly skeptical but lacking evidence to push harder. "If you remember anything else, give us a call." "Of course, detective." Now Vincenzo stood outside Creed as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed obscene given the violence of the night. His restaurant, his throne room, was a crime scene now, wrapped in yellow tape and swarming with investigators. It would be months before it reopened, if it ever did. His phone buzzed. Messages from his lieutenants, his lawyers, his various legitimate and illegitimate business partners, all wanting to know what had happened, if he was safe, what this meant for their operations. He ignored them all. Instead, he thought about a woman who could have let him die, should have let him die, but had chosen instead to become a shield between him and death. A woman whose real name he'd never know, whose face he'd barely seen clearly in the chaos, who disappeared like smoke the moment the sirens arrived. He thought about what she'd said. Live better, or at least try not to die worse. Vincenzo looked at his hands, the same hands that had ordered countless deaths, that had built an empire on suffering, and for the first time in 30 years, he wondered if there might be another way. Probably not. Almost certainly not. But maybe. Somewhere in the city, Sarah Fernandez was already gone. A new name, a new face, disappearing into the anonymous crowds where people like her lived between the missions that never officially happened. The apron she'd left behind would eventually be catalogued as evidence, filed away in some police warehouse, forgotten. But Vincenzo would remember. Would always remember. The mouse that had been a lion. The waitress who had been an angel of death. The woman who had saved a monster and then vanished into legend. Leaving behind nothing but an empty apron and a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If she could choose mercy, why couldn't he?